Hey strangers, Happy New Year. This week I'm giving you a little wee bonus episode, an amuse-bouche, if you will. If you're hungry for more content, don't forget I have 2 other podcasts, and I co-own a podcasting network, Grab Bag Collab. You can get all the regular shows on Grab Bag Collab, including my advice show, Dear Daisy, and my Love is Blind recap show, Shut the F Up, Nick Lachey, Amber Hunt's The Catalyst, as well as our rotating quarterly show offerings, all for just $5 a month. For $8, you get all that, plus Strange and Unexplained, and Amber Hunt's hit show Crimes of the Centuries, early and ad-free. There's a lot going on over at GrabBag. Go to patreon.com/GrabBagCollab to sign up. And a warning about today's episode, it's pretty gross, so I urge you not to listen while cooking or eating. Enjoy? There once was a man called Tarrare, whose appetite none could compare. His stomach so big it could fit a whole pig, and his musk could be called eau de merde. Welcome to Strange and Unexplained with me, Daisy Egan. One of my favorite books growing up was about a cat who ate everything. In my memory, it was called Skalinkenlot, the Cat Who Ate Chicago, but apparently that book never existed. After a quick sleuthing session, I found the book on the old interwebs. It was simply called The Fat Cat, and apparently it had absolutely nothing at all to do with Chicago. Nor was his name Skalinkenlot. He had no name. Skalinkenlot was the name of one of the unfortunate characters the cat ate on his travels. Turns out it is a Danish folktale. Weird how our memories work, or don't in my case. Anyway, the cat eats a pot of gruel, and then the pot, and then the woman he lives with, along with a host of other animals and people, until a woodsman splits him open with an axe, freeing all of his victims and somehow keeping the cat alive, now back to his original size with a bandage on his stomach. I'm not entirely sure what the lesson is supposed to be, but I do wonder if the inspiration for the tale came from the real-life trials and tribulations of arguably the hungriest man who ever lived. Before we begin, just a warning that today's episode is pretty gross. Seriously. Like, you know that scene in Monty Python's The Meaning of Life where the guy eats so much he vomits everywhere and then explodes? Yeah, it's like that. Come to think of it, that character was French, so maybe he was inspired by today's story too. Okay, so in we dive. Sometime in 1793 or 94, a Frenchman dressed as a Prussian peasant came to the attention of some Prussian soldiers. I believe first because of the stench he was emitting. When they found out the man couldn't speak German, he was hauled in on suspicion of being a spy for the French. After about 24 hours of torture, the Frenchman confessed that he was indeed a spy and was carrying a message for a captured French colonel. The Frenchman was presumably searched, and when no message was found on his person, he further confessed that the message was actually in his person, inside a wooden box, inside him, in case that wasn't clear. Chained to a toilet, the Frenchman sat while his captors waited for the box to, present itself. After 30 hours, it did, undigested and with the message inside. All of this was for naught, however, when the message was just asking for whomever found it to let the Frenchman's superiors know that it had been delivered. It was a test run to see if he really could smuggle notes in his stomach. Though, to be honest, I'm not sure what his commanding officer in charge of this scheme, General Alexander de Beauharnais, thought he'd then be able to get out of this plan. Unless I'm not understanding something, which certainly wouldn't be the first time, it sounds like he was like, hey, can you let me know if this scheme worked so I can actually send important messages through this guy's digestive system? Why on earth would the opposition admit to anything? Then again, what do I know? That guy was leading troops, and I'm sitting here writing about a dude who pooped out a wooden box. That said, the said dude who'd done the smuggling and subsequent pooping is known to history only as Tarrare. Whether that was his real name or a nickname, and most of his origin story, is lost to history. What we do know, and I say that with quotes because who really knows anything about anything anymore, but most especially about a truly bizarre case from more than 200 years ago, But what has been written about Tarrare is that he was born sometime in 1772, just outside Lyon, France. Sometime around when he was 15 years old, his parents kicked him out of the house because they couldn't afford to feed him. Or, more accurately, they couldn't afford to feed him as much as he seemed to need to eat. Most teenage boys are voracious eaters, but Tarrare's appetite went above and beyond. It was said he was eating his weight in meat every day, which was apparently a quarter of a cow's worth. And that wouldn't sate him. So they kicked him out, which is harsh, for sure, but times were tough and they probably had other mouths to feed, and besides, 15 was practically middle-aged back then. Like, get out of the house already. Once out there on his own, Tarrare joined up with a roving group of thieves and sex workers, which I actually love the idea of. Like just a band of outlaws kind of looking out for each other, sharing the spoils. That's what I imagine it's like anyway. Why join up with others if not for some communal benefit? That and company, I guess. Whatever. Eventually, Tarrare caught the attention of a circus somehow and was brought on to entertain crowds by eating things like wine corks, baskets of apples, and allegedly live animals. And by the time he was 16, Tarrare quit the circus and moved to Paris to hawk his talents on the streets. We don't know why he struck out on his own, but it's safe to say that other people found Tarrare, well, difficult to be around. Aside from being relentlessly hungry, which was probably annoying and expensive for anyone who chose to hang out with him, he was a copious sweater. Now, as someone who also sweats a lot, I can empathize. However, according to a piece called The Story of Tarrare, the Insatiable Glutton Who Ate Everything from Human Flesh to Live Eels, which was probably thus named as a kind of trigger warning, from all that's interesting, it was said his sweat smelled like sewer water. The smell would get worse after he ate. The first time that we know of that Tarrare ended up in the hospital for eating too much was during his Paris days. Unsurprisingly, his intestines were in very bad shape. To prove to the doctors that he could indeed eat anything, he offered to swallow the doctor's watch. The doctor would only agree to the stunt if he could go in and cut it out of him afterward. I believe Tarrare declined the counteroffer, which is too bad. Maybe the doctor might have discovered something useful diagnosis-wise while fishing around in Tarrare's guts for his watch. According to a piece from Medium by Ivan Pavlovic from 2023, Tarrare had, quote, an abnormally wide mouth with heavily damaged and stained teeth, framed by thin, almost invisible lips. The skin on the rest of his body hung down loosely, especially after he had not eaten for a while. In contrast, it would stretch to sheer impossible extents when he was full and had eaten recently, end quote. Oddly, Tarrare only weighed about 100 pounds by the time he was 17 and looked undernourished. And a piece in the London Medical and Physical Journal from 1819 reported that, quote, the space between the jaws when they were fully separated measured about 4 inches, end quote, and that with his head tilted backward, his mouth and esophagus opened so widely that, quote, a cylinder of a foot in circumference could be introduced without touching the palate, end quote. Indeed, some doctors claimed that his esophagus was so large that when his mouth was open, one could see all the way into his stomach. And yet, even with what seems to this layperson to be some kind of serious medical condition, Tarrare enlisted in the army when he was around 20 years old. These days, you can't have bone spurs, but back then, I guess you could eat so voraciously you balloon out and stink and then shrink back down and look sickly, and the French army was like, you're good to go. Whilst in the army, despite getting 4 times the rations of his fellow soldiers, Tarrare would go around asking if they were going to eat that, and when he was done with their leftovers, he could be found digging around through the garbage for scraps. According to Ripley's Believe It or Not, he would do odd jobs for other soldiers in exchange for food, and was said to search through dung hills for more scraps. I'm going to have to go with not in terms of believing that last fact. Come on now. However, apparently, at some point during his stint in the army, according to All That's Interesting, quote, he was found in the gutter shoving fistfuls of garbage into his mouth, end quote. It's hard to fathom how he didn't end up with typhoid or any other manner of disease as a result of eating garbage. I would imagine it was this talent for ingesting absolutely anything without it killing him that General Alexander de Beauharnais was like, "Sacre bleu, I bet this man can smuggle documents." So, you remember before when I wondered why the Prussians would follow a request they'd discovered pooped out of a French spy? Well, apparently a Prussian general wanted to hang Tarrare for the offense, but was somehow convinced to let him go with a warning. The warning, it seemed, worked. Tarrare got back to France and was like, "Je préférerais ne plus jamais faire ça, merci beaucoup," which roughly translates to, "Not today, Bob." And in lieu of having to participate in any wartime activities, Tarrare agreed to have the Army's chief surgeon, Dr. Pierre-François Percy, and another doctor named Corville subject him to all manner of tests in order to figure out WTF was wrong with him. Dr. Percy kept notes and wrote a paper about Tarrare, which is where the bulk of the information we have on him comes from. Hey strangers, Quince is back with amazing prices on beautiful, high-quality cashmere and silk. I love, love, love my Quince crewneck Mongolian cashmere sweaters. I'm gathering quite a collection of one of each color, and now I've decided to size up so I can be extra cozy on cold days. But if you're not into cashmere, Quince's line of machine-washable silk makes for easy, everyday luxury without the high price tag. And if you're maxed out on clothes, you can check out their collection of Italian leather handbags or hotel-quality sheets. Quince partners directly with factories that use sustainable, ethical practices and pay their workers a living wage. And shipping directly from the factories means fewer carbon emissions, and everything is packaged sustainably too. So you can look stylish and feel good about it. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/strange for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/strange to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/strange. Okay, so this is where it's going to get really gross. Consider yourself warned. Usually, Tarrare was restrained with chains when food was present, but the doctors, in order to truly understand the full extent of Tarrare's, abilities, let him loose on massive amounts and wide varieties of things he might consume. I would call it food, but, well... In one instance, Tarrare was allowed to go at a meal that was prepared for 15 men. It included 2 meat pies, 4 gallons of milk, and a plate of grease and salt, which is just like, what? Why are they serving plates of grease and salt as a food item? Were the plates of grease and salt out as some kind of condiment? Like, was it like schmaltz for chopped liver? My fellow Jews are nodding their heads right now. I hope to God there was some kind of vegetable included in this spread, but none are mentioned in any of the sources I read. Apparently before the spy mission with the secret note in a box, Army officials tested out the box-eating stunt and gave Tarrare a wooden box wrapped in paper to eat. When he pooped it out 2 days later, I can't even begin to imagine what kind of shape his butthole was in. He was rewarded with 30 pounds of raw liver and lungs, presumably from a cow. Some reward. Some say he was known to eat live animals, including an alleged incident in which he ate a live cat and basically left only skin and bones like an owl might with a mouse. It is said he also ate live puppies. In his notes, Dr. Percy wrote, quote, "The dogs and cats fled in terror at his aspect, as if they had anticipated the kind of fate he was preparing for them." End quote. He also ate live eels, lizards, and snakes, to which he was particularly partial. Why he ate them alive, I couldn't tell you. Perhaps he just really couldn't wait to get them down. Tarrare was alleged to have drunk the blood that had been collected from other hospital patients and the flesh of corpses. In attempts to cure him, Dr. Percy and Corville tried wine, vinegar, tobacco pills, laudanum, large amounts of soft-boiled eggs, and other controlled diets. This really feels like desperation. I'm no doctor, but large amounts of soft-boiled eggs? Why? Somehow, a rumor began that Tarrare ate a 14-month-old baby, and while there is apparently no actual evidence of this ever happening, it is what got him kicked out of the Army hospital and the Army altogether. 4 years later, during which no one really seems to know what Tarrare was up to or how he managed to survive, much less keep himself fed, he ended up back in the hospital with tuberculosis. A Dr. Tessier called for Percy, presumably at Tarrare's request, who came to sit with Tarrare at what would, within a month or so, become his deathbed. Tarrare told Percy he'd swallowed a fork 2 years earlier and never passed it. I don't know if he offered this information as a reason for his declining health, though why he would think, after all the literal garbage he ate, that one fork might do him in doesn't really make sense. Perhaps it was just offered as idle chit-chat. The weather's been nice lately, wouldn't you say? Oh, also, did I tell you I swallowed a fork 2 years ago? It must still be in there because I never pooped it out. Ultimately, what actually seemed to kill Tarrare was an awful bout of diarrhea, the likes of which I will not describe. You're welcome. Dr. Tessier volunteered to do Tarrare's autopsy because he was curious about, well, the whole thing, I imagine, but also he apparently wanted to find that fork for some reason. Tessier went about conducting the autopsy, which I have generously decided to spare you the details of because it is truly awful. Suffice it to say, his insides were covered in pus, his stomach was covered in ulcers, his liver and gallbladder were abnormally large, and the smell was so bad, the whole endeavor was abandoned halfway through. Also, much to Tessier's chagrin, I would imagine, no fork was located. So, what was it? What condition plagued Tarrare that sent him into the gutters to eat garbage? No one really knows. Several possible culprits have been named. It might have been polyphagia, a feeling of insatiable hunger, which could be a symptom of diabetes. Though it's hard to imagine if he did have diabetes that he didn't suffer from any other symptoms of it. Lord knows I'm no diabetes expert, as evidenced by the feedback I got from my Halloween episode in which I made a joke that sugar causes diabetes. This just in, a few people want you to know that that is a dangerous stereotype. Don't make jokes about sugar and diabetes. Take it from me. But it seems to me that if he had diabetes, he would have died long before this. I don't know a lot about nutrition, but I would think that 4 gallons of milk might have a negative impact on one's insulin levels. Don't DM me about that. We're just having fun. The polyphagia could have been the result of a damaged amygdala. I don't think his autopsy described his amygdala one way or the other. It would have been remarkable if it did, considering the amygdala wasn't even identified until 1822. Similarly, a damaged hypothalamus could have been to blame, but the hypothalamus wasn't discovered until 1893. I'm pretty sure during Tarrare's time, the brain was just considered that mushy thing inside the skull. For some people, that description is still apt. Or it might have been hyperthyroidism, a condition in which one's thyroid is, well, hyper. Again, no DMs, please. Prader-Willi syndrome has also been floated as a possibility. From the list of more than 24 symptoms that I read, it seems that excessive eating is the only one that matched Tarrare. Though I suppose it's possible he suffered from some of the other symptoms and they just kind of got lost in the sensationalism of his appetite. Ripley's Believe It or Not interviewed a doctor whose opinion was, among some of the other possibilities already mentioned, he might have had pica, which is a condition that often leads to ingestion of non-edible things like rocks, wood, and forks. The most likely culprit, in my opinion, was some kind of parasite, like hookworm or roundworm. What else could have allowed him to eat his weight in food in a day and not retain weight? This doctor, who was, by the way, a chiropractor and nutritional science guy, also suggested the voracious appetite might have been the result of an environmental cause because, he said, another man named Charles Desmarais, who lived in the same area around the same time, had similar symptoms. Charles Desmarais was a Polish man serving in the Prussian army at the same time Tarrare was smuggling boxes in his stomach for France. Details about Charles are even more vague than Tarrare, but according to the second volume of a journal called, ready for this? the eccentric mirror, reflecting a faithful and interesting delineation of male and female characters, ancient and modern, who have been particularly distinguished by extraordinary qualifications, talents, and propensities, natural or acquired, with a faithful narration of every instance of singularity manifested in the lives and conduct of characters who have rendered themselves eminently conspicuous by their eccentricities, collected and recollected from the most authentic sources by G.H. Wilson in 4 volumes. From 1806 and 1807, Mr. Wilson recounts one day in which Demaree ate 4 pounds of raw cow udder, 10 pounds of raw beef, and 2 candles. He washed it all down with 5 bottles of port, and announced that if the day hadn't been so hot and if he'd had his normal exercise, he could have easily eaten more. He also had a habit of eating live animals and once tried to eat the severed leg of a fellow soldier.
We all enjoy a little mystery. Every other week, One Strange Thing presents forgotten stories from America's news archives. They all have something in common, a single element that can't quite be explained. One Strange Thing brings you stories that are very real and just a little otherworldly. Subscribe now wherever you listen.
Along the lines of maybe it was something in the air, the doctor also suggested a nutrition deficiency brought on by the famine that resulted from the French Revolution. But one would imagine that there would have been many others suffering from the same problems as Tarrare if this were the culprit. And, stranger, it doesn't seem like there were too many others. Indeed, aside from Tarrare and Demaree, there is only one other person whose digestive exploits got him noticed. That would have been Jacques de Falais, who, wouldn't you know, lived in France around the time that Tarrare did, though he was a few decades older. Having essentially been hired for a sideshow of circus acts, de Falais performed for crowds eating unshelled nuts, pipes, unshelled hard-boiled eggs, flowers with their stems, watches, and live animals such as mice, sparrows, eels, and crayfish. Some joked that de Falais ate a live cat in order to catch a live mouse he'd eaten, and when that cat took too long to come out, he followed it with a dog. This may be where that old song, "There Was an Old Woman Who Swallowed a Fly," comes from. De Falais died by suicide, and when the autopsy was performed, it was found that he did not have any abnormally large organs or a digestive system that suggested anything out of the ordinary at all. And long before any of these men was a man named Nicholas Wood, the Great Eater of Kent, who, according to a piece about his exploits written the year he died in 1630, he, quote, did eat a whole sheep, and raw at that, at one meal. Another time he ate 30 dozen of pigeons. At Sir William Sedley's he ate as much as would have sufficed 30 men. At the Lord Wotton's in Kent, he ate at one meal 84 rabbits. He made an end of a whole hog at once, and after it swallowed 3 pecks of damsons. End quote. It would seem to me the one connecting thread with these men is their penchant for raw meat, which leads me to believe they were all suffering from severe iron deficiencies. Of course, plenty of people have iron deficiencies and don't go around bothering their local butchers for 30 pounds of raw liver, or go chasing the neighborhood stray cats. You know what I mean? There have been no modern cases of someone eating this way, though, which is probably in part thanks to the discoveries of the amygdala and hypothalamus, and just a better understanding in general of nutrition and how the human body works. I suppose these days if someone is expressing insatiable hunger or the desire to eat live animals, they can have their brains fiddled with or take pills to make their thyroids less hyper. Though Lord knows there's probably some OnlyFans out there that you can find if you're in the market for that kind of thing. Netflix tells me there was a woman who would put anything up her butt if requested, so I'm sure there are people who will eat anything for clicks and a few dollars. Who am I to judge? LOL. Perhaps the reason we don't hear of any modern-day Tarrares is because in the ensuing 200-ish years since he lived, The facts of his story have gotten stretched. There are quite a few details in this tale which really are hard to believe. Lord knows modern-day tales get pretty mushy after the third or fourth telling. I would imagine that over the years, little bits and pieces of Tarrare's story got embellished or exaggerated until we got to a point where we are meant to believe you could stick a 4-inch cylinder down his gullet without touching any sides, like a game of Operation. Or that he somehow managed to not contract any manner of aggressive disease or bacteria or whatever before his mid-20s. Personal hygiene wasn't exactly prioritized back then to begin with, so one finds it slightly unbelievable that he could eat out of the garbage, gutter, or shit piles without dying pretty quickly. Not to mention, as I already have mentioned, the condition his colon and butthole would have had to have been in. Remember the potato chips that were making people's butts leak? This guy would have had to have been like that, kind of always. There are only so many wooden boxes one can pass before one's sphincter gives up the ghost, and anything it's supposed to be holding in. If we could rewind the tape and play it back, we would likely find a man who had an incredibly voracious appetite with a few other unsavory qualities, like really rank BO. Not a man who ran around eating cats and dogs and eels and 30 pounds of raw organs. Maybe he was caught a time or two picking some food out of the garbage, but sitting in the gutter shoving fistfuls of garbage in his mouth? I find that hard to stomach, literally and figuratively. I myself have experienced insatiable hunger at times in my life. It comes in waves, and it's pretty annoying. I once went on a date, and we got some kind of meal for two thing, and when she didn't finish hers, I asked if I could. And then I ate both of our portions of dessert, too. She didn't ask for a second date. The doctors have never been able to tell me what's wrong or suggest any cure, besides drinking more water and getting more exercise. There are nights where I eat more than enough at dinner, and I'm almost immediately hungry again. I end up going to bed hungry because I know I'm not actually hungry. My brain is playing tricks on me. I could stand at my open fridge eating shredded cheese out of the bag all night. It won't do any good. I'll still end up going to bed telling my stomach, "That'll do, pig." But damn if I don't really feel hungry. Perhaps it is an existential hunger. Perhaps what I have in common with Tarrare and his ilk is some kind of metaphorical hunger that can't be sated with food. Perhaps. For now, I'll stick to the shredded cheese, and when I start looking at my dog and thinking, he looks like a snack, I'll start to panic. Next time on Strange and Unexplained. Before Adolf Hitler began really building his movement of anti-Semitism and hate, before he wrote his prison tome of awfulness, before even Germans really knew who he was and what he stood for, he was studying the words of one of America's fathers of the Industrial Revolution and gathering inspiration. Without Henry Ford, it's possible there wouldn't have been an Adolf Hitler. Strange and Unexplained is a production of Three Goose Entertainment with help from Grab Bag Collab. This episode was written by Eve Kerrigan and me, with research from the Strange Research Squad. Sound engineering by Jeff Devine. If you have an idea for an episode, head to our website, strangeandunexplainedpod.com, and fill out the contact form. I will write back. For more amazing content, join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab, where for just $5 a month you get all the Grab Bag exclusive shows, and for $8 you get those, plus Amber Hunt's Crimes of the Centuries and Strange and Unexplained early and ad-free. Grab Bag is an all-female and non-binary owned profit share network where our contributors get to keep ownership of their shows. We strive to give a platform to those who might not be able to land themselves on a bigger network. Who knows? Maybe you have a podcast idea you'd like to pitch to Grab Bag. We've got live recordings, watch parties, book clubs, and more. Why there's so much going on over at Grab Bag, you'll wonder if we missed the memo on how capitalism works. Join me on Instagram at SNUPod, Daisy Egan, and Grab Bag Collab, or head to the Facebook page to join in the conversation. If you like the show, please visit a sponsor with our unique code, give us a quick review and 5 stars, subscribe and download, and tell a friend. Stay strange.